Welcome to Fantasy Audiobook, Chapter 11. The plane arrived in New York at 2 in the morning. During this period, under Charles's patient guidance for 6 or 7 hours, Lu Yu finally learned how to enter and exit the spiritual world freely without guidance or help. Although the entry process takes several seconds, compared to the situation where he couldn't even sense it at the beginning, Lu Yu was indeed able to do it. As for changing matter in the spiritual world and bringing others into the spiritual world, their difficulty simply exceeded Lu Yu's imagination. He tried for a long time but couldn't even get a clue. This can't help but make Lu Yu a little anxious. Could it be that his spiritual world can't bring people in? If he can enter this spiritual world himself, but can't bring others in, then what's the use of it? When fighting an enemy, if you can't beat yourself, do you run to the spiritual world to hide, and then leave your physical body in reality to be beaten by others? Kid, don't be discouraged. I believe you can do it. You are already doing very well, you just need a lot of time and energy to practice. When Lu Yu was dejected, Charles comforted him. Unlike the ability given by the mysterious disc that Lu Yu can use proficiently directly, the ability brought to him by the variant ability requires Lu Yu to slowly explore it himself. Lu Yu can basically control the way in and out of the spiritual world in just a few hours, which is already a very remarkable thing even in the eyes of a master like Charles. You must know that the more powerful mutant power is, the more difficult it is to develop and control. For a long time in his youth, Charles suffered from an inability to control his powers. Magneto awakened his ability because he was so grief-stricken after witnessing his mother die in front of him. In Charles's view, Lu Yu's ability is on the same level as him and Magneto, and both are the pinnacle of alpha-level abilities. Lu Yu has mastered the method of entering and exiting the spiritual world so easily. It can be said that he has extraordinary ability. In fact, Lu Yu understands what Charles said. It's just that he once mastered a powerful power effortlessly. Now he is not used to working hard to develop another ability but always hitting a wall and failing. After getting off the plane, little Wendy seemed to be still awake, rubbing her eyes and looking dazed. She held Lu Yu's arm with one hand and looked at the surrounding environment with blank eyes. This was the first time she left home and saw the outside world. Ever since Lu Yu showed that he could control the death energy in front of Wendy, Wendy has been very clingy to Lu Yu. Lu Yu doesn't dislike this, but rather likes the feeling of being stuck. Lu Yu originally thought that someone from Xavier's school would pick them up after arriving in New York, but who knew that Charles called a taxi and let Lu Yu and Wendy get in. Lu Yu had some doubts in his heart. Even if Charles took him to England without taking the supersonic plane that could take off from the basketball court, why did he still take Lu Yu and Wendy back to school alone in a taxi? After arriving in New York, what he knew about Professor This is not the case with X. In the movie, when Charles leaves Xavier's school, he will be accompanied by 2 X-Men. On the one hand, it is to protect Charles's safety, and on the other hand, it is also to facilitate teaching the X-Men the principles of life. Because Charles regards Cyclops as his future successor, Cyclops is his favorite person to have around him. Thinking of this, Lu Yu suddenly realized that he had been ignoring a very serious problem. He prejudged that he was before the plot of X-Men 1 based on the time and age, but he actually did not know that his life was changed by Wolverine. The future timeline is still the old timeline that will lead to the end of Mutant. If this is a new timeline, then Phoenix, Cyclops, and the others haven't been found yet, so they are not accompanied by X-Men when traveling. Lu Yu didn't know much about the timeline that had reversed the future, so he could only make random guesses. Lu Yu couldn't ask Charles directly, so he could only wait for Xavier's school to judge with full of doubts. Whether it is a new timeline or an old timeline, just look at whether there is Storm in Xavier's school. In the new timeline, Storm is one of the 4 horsemen of Apocalypse, and only joined Xavier's school after Apocalypse failed to commit suicide. If there is Storm in Xavier's school, it means that Lu Yu is now in the old timeline. If there is no Storm, then it is the new timeline. Suppressing the doubts in his heart, Lu Yu started playing around with Wendy all the way. A few hours before the sun was about to rise, the taxi bumped to the outskirts of New York and finally stopped in front of a spacious manor. Welcome to the Xavier Ability Youth School. Charles pushed his wheelchair in front of the manor gate and said proudly to Lu Yu and Wendy behind him. Lu Yu held Wendy's hand and followed Charles's gaze. There was a majestic building standing in the center of the manor. Lu Yu knew that it was the family castle left by Charles's family to Charles, and it was now used by Charles as a school for teaching mutants. This school provides shelter to countless mutants who have been abandoned by their families and protected them from persecution by others. As long as Charles is still here, no one will dare to enter here to capture mutant. This is the culmination of Charles's lifelong efforts, and it is indeed something he can be proud of. I think life here will be very good. Lu Yu smiled and nodded to Charles, looking very satisfied. Wendy, little angel, what do you think? Lu Yu turned to Wendy, who was holding her arms, and asked. Wendy's face turned red and she whispered, I think it's great. We can see each other here every day. Lu Yu was a little helpless but could do nothing about Wendy's over-reliance on him. He knew that Wendy said this not because of love or liking, but because of her extreme lack of security. Lu Yu didn't think much about it. She just hoped that she could help Wendy find the liveliness that a girl of her age should have in the future. Charles pushed the wheelchair slowly into the manor, and Lu Yu pulled Wendy to follow him closely. I will take you to the room prepared for you first, so that you can have a good sleep first. Charles said as he walked, we will not arrange classes for you in 2 days. You can take advantage of these few days to get familiar with the school environment of. My classmates in the school are all mutants like us, and they are all very kind. I hope you can make more friends, and I believe you will not be disappointed. I'm looking forward to it. The corners of Lu Yu's mouth curled up slightly, and he looked at the lake in the distance, where several figures were moving, apparently exercising their mutant abilities. From today on, I can truly begin to get involved in the historical development of this world. Chapter 12, Lu Yu didn't know how long he slept. The excessive consumption of mental energy made Lu Yu exhausted. As soon as he covered himself with the quilt, he quickly fell asleep. When he woke up, it was completely dark. In fact, according to Lu Yu's situation, it is very possible that he would sleep until the next day. The reason why he woke up so early was entirely because his perception became more and more sharp after his mutant ability awakening. I was woken up by the constant sound of turning books. It's not a good night's sleep. Reluctantly, Lu Yu opened her eyes and sat up, holding her still aching head. Holy crap! Who are you? Lu Yu saw a woman sitting next to his bed with a book. He was startled and hurriedly pulled the quilt to the head of the bed. He leaned closer and even used swear words that he hadn't used in a long time. The woman sitting on the chair reading a book heard the sound and closed the book. She raised her head and said to Lu Yu with some confusion, You are awake. Did I wake you up? I'm sorry for disturbing your sleep. I'm a teacher at this school. My name is Qin Gray. Teacher, okay. Lu Yu actually guessed that Qin Huo was Phoenix when he saw her red hair. Qin Gray's self-introduction also proved that Lu Yu's guess was correct. He is younger than the Phoenix in the movie, about 20 years old. The same appearance is more beautiful than in the movie, and there is a dangerous charm that is as deadly as fire hidden all over her body. Although Lu Yu already knew that the woman in front of him was the famous Phoenix, he couldn't show it. Moreover, Lu Yu also thinks that even if you are Phoenix, you are very popular and you can come in and out of my room at will. Lu Yu is a person who attaches great importance to his privacy. This is all thanks to Lu Yu's mother. She always likes to look through the small boxes hidden in Lu Yu's room when he goes out to carry out daily suicide missions. Living in the shadow of her mother's control and unable to resist, Lu Yu was very sensitive to her own room, so Lu Yu frowned and asked rudely, Teacher, I don't seem to know you. How do you do that? Coming in. Qin Gray pointed to the door without changing her expression and said firmly, You came in through the door. Lu Yu's eyes twitched a few times. I remember that I locked the door before going to bed. Even if it was unlocked, don't you know that it is very impolite to enter the room of the opposite sex at will? Teacher. Lu Yu deliberately emphasized the word teacher because she wanted to tell Qin Gray that her behavior was unethical. It's just like what the professor said. You're a little brat. Are you still afraid that I'll look at you? Qin Gray didn't get angry after hearing Lu Yu's explosive words. Instead, she said with a smile, Even if I look at you, you won't suffer any loss. Lu Yu was unconvinced and wanted to tell her that 10-year-old children also had human rights and personal privacy should not be infringed. But before he could open the piano, Gray explained, Students' rooms have to be checked every day, and teachers have keys in their hands. Jean Grey looked at her watch and added, "If you want to check your bed, it will be at this time. Do you have any questions? You are the teacher, you win." What Lu Yu wanted to say was blocked by Jean Grey. He had to say very unwillingly, "Now that you have finished checking the dormitory, leave quickly." Jean Grey shrugged her shoulders and said helplessly, "You are so hostile to me, aren't you afraid that I will give you little shoes to wear in the future? We will meet often in the future. Believe me, if the professor hadn't asked me to come here, I wouldn't be interested in boys your age," Jean Grey said with a look of disgust. "The professor asked you to come here." Lu Yu's tone softened slightly. "What's the reason the professor asked you to come here?" Jean Grey stood up and put the book on the table and said, "Your mental energy was a lot overdrawn before. The state of mental overdraw is very dangerous for us, so the professor asked me to guide you into deep sleep to help you recover. Judging from your performance now, the effect is not bad." Lu Yu spread a hand toward the window, and a small stream of fine yellow sand floated out from the gap in the window. It gathered in Lu Yu's hand and kept spinning, forming various strange shapes. Although Lu Yu still had a headache like a hangover, it was much better than before when he had a splitting headache whenever he used ability. Lu Yu had previously estimated that it would take at least a week to recover to this level naturally. "Sorry, I got a little excited just now." Lu Yu smiled apologetically at Jean Grey. Although others said they broke into his room, they were here to help him. Lu Yu was not an unreasonable person. After knowing the truth of the matter, his anger subsided. Jean Grey nodded and looked intently at the yellow sand spinning in Lu Yu's hand, and said with appreciation, "Is this your ability? Your control is really good. You don't know." Lu Yu was a little surprised when he heard what Jean Grey said. He thought that Charles had told Jean Grey everything about him, but now it seems that Jean Grey acted like he didn't know anything. "I don't know, should I know in advance?" Jean Grey glanced at Lu Yu in surprise. "I just returned to school not long ago. Before I came here, the professor only asked me not to treat you as a child. He didn't say anything to me. You said you just came back. Was it a vacation?" Jean Grey was stunned for a moment and nodded and said, "Yes, I traveled a few times with my friends during my vacation." Lu Yu grinned after hearing this. He had just been wondering why Jean Grey didn't go to England with Charles or pick him up at the airport since she was at Xavier's school. Now he could basically guess from Jean Grey's words that the X-Men must be performing missions collectively and using supersonic fighter planes, which was why Charles had to take a passenger plane when traveling alone. Because the professor cannot wait, whether it is Lu Yu or Wendy, no matter which one falls into the wrong hands, it will cause huge amounts of damage to the world. Lu Yu gently held his hand, and all the yellow sand in his hand turned into dust and dissipated in the air in an instant. This sight shocked Jean Grey again. Being able to change the form of matter, you really don't look like a mutant who has just awakened ability. Jean Grey stared at Lu Yu with a very shocked expression and said, "I think now I know why the professor values you so much. Because many mutants will experience energy outbursts and mental overdraft when they are awakening ability." So after Jean Grey saw Lu Yu's mental overdraft, she naturally thought that Lu Yu also belonged to this type of mutant. And a newly awakened mutant can actually change the form of matter. This kind of thing is as scary as a horror story. She thinks Lu Yu must be an Omega-level mutant. Chapter 13. Lu Yu didn't know that Jean Grey misunderstood that he was an Omega-level mutant. In fact, if the power given to him by the mysterious disc was counted as a mutant ability, it was indeed an Omega-level. In addition to having infinite potential, the Omega-level mutant ability must also be able to violate the laws of the universe. The orb ability can do this, but Lu Yu's own mutant ability cannot do this. Therefore, even if Lu Yu develops the mutant ability to the level of infinite moon damage, it can only be regarded as an alpha-level mutant. Before you officially enroll, the college needs to conduct a comprehensive physical examination on you. There will be blood tests and other items during the examination, so this matter requires your consent. Jean Grey returned from the shock. When he came to his senses, he looked at Lu Yu with a solemn look. She believes that Lu Yu is an Omega-level mutant like her. As the only Omega-level mutant in the Academy, no one in the entire Academy except Charles knows better than her what this level of mutant represents. Lu Yu frowned after hearing this. He was very resistant to things like blood drawing that involved genes. He knew that many mutants had their blood and body tissues obtained by the enemy, and the enemy used their genes to develop ways to deal with them. Mystique is the best example. It is precisely because the enemy caught her and analyzed the secret of shapeshifting in her genes that Sentinel will become the nemesis of all mutants in the future and become irresistibly powerful. If mutated genes are analyzed and used by interested people, they will make powerful mutants vulnerable. Therefore, anything related to their own genes is taboo for mutants. It is for this reason that Jean Grey will undergo a physical examination. Before seek Lu Yu's opinion. Am I the only one who needs to be examined? Lu Yu asked carefully after thinking carefully for a while. Jean Grey felt very helpless at Lu Yu's cautious performance. She said angrily, "It's not conducive to a child's growth to have so many doubts. Examinations are done by every student so that the college can research and understand your abilities so as to better guide your future direction. The little girl who came with you also completed all the examinations earlier." Lu Yu nodded without speaking, but continued his thinking. He didn't doubt that Xavier's school would use his genes to create weapons against him, but he knew that Xavier's school was not an absolutely safe place. Whether in the old timeline or the new timeline, Xavier's school will be breached in the future. What he fears is that his genes will fall into the hands of people like Stryker. Although the ball ability is given to Lu Yu's soul, even if slight traces can be found in the genes of Lu Yu's body, it is impossible to find a way to restrain him. But even so, Lu Yu thinks that it is a very troublesome matter for the enemy to crack the variant ability of the spiritual world. Letting Xavier's school study his genes has advantages and disadvantages for Lu Yu. The advantage is that after studying Lu Yu's X gene, Xavier's school can help Lu Yu improve his mutant ability more systematically and quickly. The disadvantages of this are also obvious. Regardless of whether Xavier's school will research in another direction, if it can improve his ability, it will definitely find a way to weaken or restrain his ability. I can cooperate with the inspection, but I have a request. Lu Yu thought for a long time, and finally decided to let Xavier's school study his genes to help him improve his mutant ability. As a former Naruto fan, being able to control a super ability as cool as you do is very attractive to him. Anyway, the ball ability, which is Lu Yu's main means, cannot be deciphered from genes. The analysis of Lu Yu's genes will not be as fatal to Lu Yu as other mutants. Jean Grey nodded and signaled Lu Yu to continue. My request is very simple, that is, after the research is completed, my blood samples and genetic information must be completely destroyed. Lu Yu said in an unquestionable tone. Jean Grey looked at Lu Yu with deep eyes and said, "Yes, in fact, if you don't tell us, we will destroy your information after research. We have already learned a lesson in this regard, so we will not do it again." Second mistake. Lu Yu was a little confused when Jean Grey looked at her, and turned her head to one side uncomfortably. He knew that his behavior was a little too vigilant, not like a 10-year-old child. But Lu Yu can't tell Jean Grey that I am a time traveler and I understand the future of this world. I know that your Xavier's school will be like a sieve in the future. Whoever wants to come in and search can come in and search. Fortunately, Jean Grey quickly withdrew her gaze and did not embarrass Lu Yu for a long time. You don't have the ability to live forever, do you? Jean Grey said seriously, are you actually not a child, but an uncle who has endured countless years of wasted time? I live in New York with my parents. What do you think? There is indeed the person you are looking for, but his name is not Prince, his name is Wolverine. Lu Yu's face suddenly darkened, and his tone he said unkindly. Although his actual age is indeed more than 10 years old, and he will probably live forever unless something unexpected happens, being called an uncle by Jean Grey makes him feel very annoyed. Because he was 30 years old in 2 lifetimes, he could barely bear the title of uncle. An old man was always unwilling to admit the fact that he was already old. Children are children, and they can't joke at all. Jean Grey didn't react to Lu Yu's mention of Wolverine, as if she didn't know about Wolverine. She walked to the door of the room with a smile, opened the door and said to Lu Yu, have a good rest. I will pick you up to take you to the laboratory tomorrow. After saying that, Jean Grey walked out and closed the door for Lu Yu. Seeing Jean Grey leaving, Lu Yu curled her lips. Judging from Jean Grey's reaction, he concluded that Wolverine had not been to Xavier's school at this point in time. And Wolverine did not come to Xavier's school, so Lu Yu could not judge his own timeline from Wolverine's status. I still have to wait until tomorrow to find Storm? Suddenly free, Lu Yu suddenly felt a little bored. Unable to find anything to do, he simply began to look at the room where he lived. In the morning, he was too tired and wanted to sleep, so he didn't pay close attention to the room where he would live for a long time. A room of about 30 square meters is not large, but it is not small either. In addition to a bed and a wardrobe, there is only a small table and matching chairs against the wall. The layout of the entire room is very simple. When Lu Yu saw the table next to the wall, she discovered that there was still the book Jean Grey was reading on the table. She did not take the book with her when she left. Lu Yu was a little curious about what kind of book Jean Grey, Phoenix, who would be called the White Phoenix King in the future, was reading, so he turned over and got out of bed. Picking up the book about 5 or 6 centimeters thick on the table, Lu Yu's eyes lit up when he saw the title of the book, and he couldn't help feeling grateful to Jean Grey, because the title of this book is called Hypnotic Ability and Deep Dream Production. Chapter 14. Early the next morning, Jean Grey used her key specially provided for teachers to enter Lu Yu's room without Lu Yu's permission, and pushed Lu Yu to wake him up. Under Lu Yu's resentful eyes, she remained calm like a parent supervising a child, instructing Lu Yu to rinse his mouth and wash his face. After Lu Yu cleaned himself up, he couldn't wait to drag Lu Yu out of the room. Lu Yu followed Jean Grey through several floors. During this period, he saw many mutant children passing by him. Some would look at him secretly with curious expressions, and some would smile directly at him. For Lu Yu's appearance, these children were very kind. Lu Yu didn't see Wendy as he walked all the way, which made him a little disappointed. He didn't know if that little girl had made any new friends in the college. Jean Grey and Lu Yu finally stopped in front of an inconspicuous wall that was no different from the surrounding environment. Just when Lu Yu was puzzled, Jean Grey pressed her hand on the flat wall. As several blue lights appeared out of thin air on the wall and swept across her palm, the sound of mechanical operation sounded in the wall. Under Lu Yu's dumbfounded gaze, the entire wall cracked in the middle. The wall was divided into 2 pieces and recessed a little, and then quickly expanded to both sides, revealing the hidden space inside. What the hell is this? Has Xavier's school's technology become so advanced in just 9 years? Even this kind of design was created. Marvel is indeed famous for its black technology. Lu Yu couldn't help but sigh. He thought for a while, compared to the series of super-era black technologies that Iron Man's father had developed during World War II, Xavier's school was still relatively low-level. Definitely, except for the supersonic fighter jet that can take off on a basketball court. What Marvel black technology? Jean Grey was very satisfied with Lu Yu's surprised reaction, but she couldn't understand what Lu Yu said at all. Was it a compliment or something else? Lu Yu laughed and said, "It's nothing. It's just my personal habit of randomly choosing names. DC, Marvel, Naruto, Pirates and many more." Jean Grey probably thought that Lu Yu was a Chuyunibu at his age, so she didn't dwell too much on Lu Yu's words. She walked into the space inside the wall, then turned around and said to Lu Yu with a smile, "Welcome to my private laboratory. You are the first student lucky enough to enter here. I don't feel honored by this treatment." Lu Yu walked in and looked at the various complicated instruments placed everywhere in the laboratory. He felt that his scalp was numb. Jean Grey rolled her eyes at Lu Yu and said to Lu Yu while putting on her white coat, "You basically don't need these instruments. You only need to do a few simple tests." "That's good, it scared me to death," Lu Yu said jokingly after breathing a sigh of relief. "It made me feel like I was being dissected. What should we do first?" "Let me sit on a chair and draw my blood." Lu Yu looked around and found that the chairs in this laboratory were adjusted a bit high. He probably had to climb to sit on them. Jean Grey put on a mask and took a record book and walked to an instrument and waved to Lu Yu. "The blood drawing will have to wait until the end. You need to come here to test your strength first." "I'm not a body-strengthening mutant. Why am I testing this?" Although Lu Yu was complaining, he still walked over to Jean Grey. "Did the professor tell you about me later?" I asked, "but the professor didn't tell me." Jean Grey shrugged and said helplessly, "The professor is always like that. He said you are a special child and he needs to respect your privacy. This is why I like the professor, because the professor is like a teacher. At least he will not use his status as a teacher to break into the room of the opposite sex again." And again, Lu Yu stood in front of Jean Grey and raised his head a little provocatively. He blinked at Jean Grey. He still felt deep resentment towards Jean Grey for pulling him out of the quilt early this morning. Jean Grey turned a blind eye to Lu Yu's provocation. After adjusting the instrument to a height suitable for Lu Yu, she pointed at the red sponge in the middle of the instrument and said, "Punch here with all your strength and I will record the data." Seeing that Jean Grey didn't answer his words, Lu Yu curled his lips and rolled up his sleeves, and then punched the red sponge hard. Originally, this was a handsome move in Lu Yu's mind, but the reality was that Lu Yu almost fell to the ground due to the excessive movement and unstable center of gravity. Fortunately, Jean Grey held him in time. Even if the students are provocative in every possible way, the teacher will still lend a helping hand to this thorn in a critical moment. Jean Grey said teasingly to the embarrassed Lu Yu after she straightened her up. Punch strength 86 kilograms. Before Lu Yu could speak, Jean Grey read out the data on the instrument, and then recorded the data in the record book. "This is a mistake. This is not my full strength. I think I can hit at least 100 kilograms if I try my best." It's a pity that Lu Yu's words didn't make Jean Grey let him hit him again. Jean Grey walked to a treadmill again, and Lu Yu had to look at the instrument measuring boxing strength unwillingly and then followed 7.1 meters per second. Fortunately, Lu Yu was very satisfied with his performance in the running test, and Jean Grey also recorded this data. After Lu Yu underwent several physical tests, Jean Grey took a tube of Lu Yu's blood for testing. Neither Lu Yu nor Jean Grey noticed that at the moment the syringe was withdrawn from Lu Yu's arm. A gray light that was difficult to see with the naked eye appeared on the small wound on Lu Yu's arm. In front of the laboratory microscope, Lu Yu looked at Jean Grey, who was observing his blood and taking notes. He was curious about what Jean Grey could analyze from his blood. About an hour later, when Lu Yu was so bored that she almost fell asleep, Jean Grey finally let go of the microscope with a serious expression. "Do you want to know what I found?" Jean Grey stared at Lu Yu, as if she wanted to see through Lu Yu. "I definitely want to know, otherwise why would I be waiting for you here?" Lu Yu was a little creeped out by Jean Grey, so she said in a bad tone, "Your physical test results are very good, and you are already close to the level of an ordinary adult. I roughly estimate that when you become an adult, you will have a physical fitness that is 5 to 8 times higher than that of a normal person. It's amazing, but nothing compared to what I found in your blood. If I hadn't been operating it from beginning to end, I definitely wouldn't have believed what I saw. Your cells are simply existences that are not allowed by God." Jean Grey's hand holding the record book was shaking slightly. Her expression was very complicated and hesitation. "I ask you, you must answer me truthfully. Have you ever been injured? Have you found any difference between yourself and others after being injured?" "I've definitely been injured, more than once or twice." Lu Yu still has fresh memories of the countless times he tried to commit suicide. In the beginning, he was not covered in bruises. "What's the difference? You don't think I'm the same as Wolverine, do you? I was injured but I bleed like a normal person, and I almost died." Lu Yu stopped speaking, and his pupils suddenly began to enlarge. He always believed that the bead's ability acted on the soul, and there was no trace of the cobweb horse in his blood. But he ignored one problem, that is, his body is immune to death because of the ball bead's ability. Chapter 15. Although Lu Yu knew that he was immune to death because he controlled the death rules, but he didn't know what kind of immunity method this was. Like Mr. Immortal, will he be resurrected immediately after death with full status? Or does it have the super rapid regeneration ability like Wolverine? In the former case, you may not be able to find anything in your own genes. After all, that kind of ability is simply imaginary and has no limit. But if it's the latter, then Jean Grey must have found something similar to a self-healing factor in her genes. But if this is the case, Lu Yu still feels very confused. Even if Jean Grey hasn't met Wolverine yet, there are many mutants with self-healing ability in the Marvel world. As a member of one of the organizations with the deepest understanding of mutants in the world, Jean Grey must have come into contact with self-healing people. So since Jean Grey has been exposed to self-healing factors before, why did she show an expression of disbelief after observing Lu Yu's blood, and describe the cells in Lu Yu's blood as not allowed by God to exist? Lu Yu vaguely felt from Jean Grey's attitude that the way for her body to be immune to death was probably not rapid regeneration, but a more terrifying method than rapid regeneration. "What exactly did you find?" Lu Yu regretted agreeing to Qin Gray's examination of her body. The reason why he was so nonchalant about physical examinations before was because he felt that his most critical orb ability could not be traced in his genes. But now it seems that this is not what he thought. Qin Gray took a deep look at Lu Yu, turned around and picked up the test tube containing Lu Yu's blood, and then said to Lu Yu, "I will do an experiment for you. Blood is a liquid that can be heated at high temperatures. It will evaporate underneath. My elementary school teacher has already told me this knowledge. I think we should start with the key points directly. What do you think?" Lu Yu said anxiously. What he wants to know most now is whether Qin Gray already knows the secret of her immunity to death. Qin Gray did not answer Lu Yu's words, but placed the test tube in an instrument with grooves. After pressing a button, Qin Gray spoke again. "Now we heat your blood. This device can heat water to the boiling point in 2 seconds and atomize the water into gas in 5 seconds. Now you see, 5 seconds have passed while I was talking to you, but your blood still hasn't reacted at all." Lu Yu frowned after hearing Qin Gray's words, and looked at the buzzing instrument in confusion. Indeed, just as Qin Gray said, Lu Yu's blood in the test tube did not even ripple under the heating of the instrument. What does this mean? Lu Yu asked aloud. He majored in computer science in his previous life. He was completely confused as to why his blood had this phenomenon, but he just thought it was a bit magical. Your cells will not change even after receiving external influences. They will always exist unchanged. Qin Gray is different from Lu Yu. She is an expert in multiple disciplines and she understands this very well. What the phenomenon represented, combined with the data she observed in Lu Yu's blood, made her have a guess about Lu Yu that she dared not say out loud. Qin Gray picked up the record book on the table and said, "Human cells will continue to divide throughout life. Injury or exercise will accelerate the cell division process. The newly divided cells will replace those old cells, allowing people's bodies can maintain vitality. But the number of cell divisions is also limited, and the speed of cell division determines a person's lifespan. But during the hour I observed your blood, I found no signs of cell division in your blood." Qin Gray took a deep breath and said in as calm a voice as possible, "Cells do not divide. You have changed so much that you can grow up to 10 years old normally and have a physique that is far superior to that of your peers. This is biologically impossible. And under normal circumstances like yours, because cells do not divide to promote wound healing, a small wound is likely to take your life. But you told me that you have been injured many times, and among them there are even broken bones. You're still standing here intact? And you can punch an adult with one punch. Your body couldn't be better. I have a guess, but I really don't want to believe my guess." Qin Gray tried her best to keep her tone calm, but her eyes that kept flashing still betrayed her heart, because once this guess is confirmed, it would overturn everything I have learned over the years. Although Lu Yu didn't quite understand part of what Qin Gray said, he still understood what Qin Gray meant. That is, the existence of Lu Yu violates the existing scientific laws. It is estimated that even using the X gene cannot explain the phenomenon of Lu Yu. Otherwise, Qin Gray would not say that Lu Yu's situation would overturn all the knowledge she has learned. Such words. Lu Yu swallowed his saliva. He wanted to tell Qin Gray that he was injured before he obtained the Yuanpan ability. At that time, he was still a serious ordinary person. She thought. Too much. But Lu Yu couldn't say that this involved his biggest secret. He felt that he should enlighten Qin Gray. He knew that this woman had a dual personality. If this rational personality suddenly collapsed and the brutal phoenix personality was released, Lu Yu might not even be able to find a place to cry. He had heard of many genius scientists who would do any crazy thing in order to get answers to questions. So Lu Yu raised his head and stared at Qin Gray carefully and said, "I think maybe science is not developed enough now, and maybe it can be explained in the future. Don't worry, I'm optimistic about you." After speaking, he also made a cheering gesture to Qin Gray. Qin Gray hesitated for a while, and finally made up her mind to open the test tube containing Lu Yu's blood with trembling hands, and separated the glass splint containing Lu Yu's blood in the microscope. These instruments are special materials that can isolate many factors that are not conducive to research. Qin Gray explained to Lu Yu, "Now that I open them, it will be revealed soon whether my guess is correct." A few minutes passed, and just when Lu Yu felt that Qin Gray's behavior was a bit Inexplicable, something happened that stunned him. The blood on the glass splint and in the test tube seemed to come alive, floating in the air, gathering together, and spinning continuously. Lu Yu's arm suddenly lit up with a gray light at this moment, and the blood in the air seemed to be guided by the gray light, and immediately penetrated into Lu Yu's arm. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. Welcome to Fantasy Audiobook, Chapter 16. Things happened so quickly that Lu Yu didn't even realize it was over. He touched his arm that had returned to normal and said with some confusion, "What happened? Did it come back into my body again? Weren't you like this when you were injured before?" Jean Grey was a little surprised by Lu Yu's reaction. She thought that Lu Yu recovered like this when he was injured before, but Lu Yu looked like she was witnessing it for the first time. Things like this happen. Lu Yu was indeed frightened. He thought about many possibilities. Although he was mentally prepared, he never thought that he would be immune to death in such a terrifying way. The lost blood automatically returned to his body, and his body returned to its original state. If other body tissues will automatically return to their original positions after being damaged to any extent, then it will indeed achieve the effect of being immune to death. But this method is too terrifying. Think about it. After the Hulk punched Lu Yu into a pulp, Lu Yu's body squeezed and squeezed on the ground for a long time before he put himself back together, and then raised a middle finger towards the Hulk. The picture was so beautiful that it gave Lu Yu goosebumps. This scene made Lu Yu couldn't help but think of the famous talker in Marvel, Deadpool. Could it be that when he fights in the future, he will become as funny as him? How could this be? Shouldn't domineering be synonymous with oneself? Lu Yu came back to his senses and shook his head in confusion, making a silly expression and said, "No, I used to be very normal, but it was after the professor found me that I started to become abnormal." "Didn't you say that I had something? X gene? Is it because of this X gene?" Jean Grey saw that Lu Yu was hiding something from her, but she did not point it out. Since Charles chose to respect the secret of the little boy in front of her, she would not question Charles's choice as a member of Xavier's school. She looked at Lu Yu again with a look that made Lu Yu feel embarrassed, then took out a lighter and burned the notebook with Lu Yu's information in front of Lu Yu. After the record book was completely burned to ashes, Jean Grey said to Lu Yu with a very serious expression, "You can't mention the experimental results I got here today to anyone, just treat it as if it never happened. I will treat you report the situation to the professor, and the professor will decide whether to analyze your X gene." "Okay, I promise I've forgotten it." Lu Yu is not stupid. He definitely knows how much trouble it will cause him if today's events are revealed. There is no shortage of madmen in this world, especially those who long for eternal life. Lu Yu's blood contained the secret of eternal life, and he didn't want to have to be wary of those people all the time in the days to come. "Fortunately, I am in Xavier's school. Currently, Jean Grey is still Charles's favorite protégé. She inherits Charles's noble personality and does not have any bad intentions towards Lu Yu. Otherwise, Lu Yu would probably have to live with her parents." The days of hiding in Tibet. Lu Yu secretly made up his mind that he would never be as reckless as he was today in the future, and should carefully consider everything before proceeding. This is enough for him to do such a stupid thing as exposing his genes to others. "We are also thinking about your safety." Jean Grey nodded approvingly to Lu Yu. Unlike some human cells that have self-healing factors that can regenerate at high speed, although your cells cannot regenerate, they have a truly indelible attribute. This will cause countless people to want to catch you and study you. Don't talk about those who have lost their minds. Even I am very curious, how did you grow so big when your whole body is full of these cells? What method does your body use to prevent cells from dividing? Grow taller and fatter. Jean Grey said with a hint of helplessness. The knowledge she had learned could not explain the existence of Lu Yu at all, which made her begin to wonder if she had taken the wrong path in biology. "You ask me, who should I ask? I'm still a child." Lu Yu shrugged like Jean Grey and said innocently, "Also, when will we start the physical examination?" Jean Grey looked at Lu Yu dumbfounded. She had just told Lu Yu to forget about having an examination today. Lu Yu used this incident to remind her that she should also forget about it and not mention it again. The feeling of being choked by a student is not pleasant at all. What a clever guy. Jean Grey slapped Lu Yu on the back of the head angrily. Lu Yu covered the area where she had been photographed and smiled stupidly at Jean Grey, which made Jean Grey even more speechless. Lu Yu, a 10-year-old child, acted as if he was self-taught. You can go back to your room, or you can go and play with your little girlfriend. Jean Grey opened the door to the laboratory and pushed Lu Yu out. The professor and I may come to see you later. Hey, can the teacher spread rumors casually? You have caused very serious damage to my reputation and Wendy's. Lu Yu felt very dissatisfied with Jean Grey's behavior of treating her as a child. But in fact his body is really just that of a child. Okay, you can go to the professor to complain now. Anyway, don't disturb me. Jean Grey stood at the door of the laboratory and crossed her arms and said, I want to stay alone for a while now. You didn't keep the sample and wanted to study me secretly, right? Lu Yu looked into the laboratory and said with doubtful eyes, I haven't even checked the physical examination. Where did the sample come from? This was Jean Grey's revenge for Lu Yu's behavior of choking her just now, which made Lu Yu choke and stand there not knowing what to say. This revenge came faster than Lu Yu imagined. You watched it from beginning to end. I also burned the records, and all. Your blood ran back into your body. Jean Grey pressed the closed door of the laboratory. She stood in the experiment the room waved to Lu Yu outside. If it's the same, being so suspicious is not conducive to growth at all. After the door to the laboratory was closed, Jean Grey leaned against the door and closed her eyes. Her mind was now in a mess. Although she is a mutant and has magical abilities, she still finds it hard to believe that there are actually people in this world who can live forever. With such ability, what is the difference between humans and gods? Chapter 17, Hi Brother. Lu Yu felt that he needed to understand the timeline he was in first, so he grabbed a black child in the corridor and asked, do you know if there is a female teacher in the school with white hair? The black child was half a head shorter than Lu Yu. He raised his head and replied hesitantly, are you talking about teacher Ororo? She seems to be the only one in the school with white hair. Lu Yu's heart sank. It seemed that he was in a timeline where the future had not been reversed. After Lu Yu knew that he was a mutant, this was the worst news he got. Lu Yu felt extremely heavy when she thought that in the future, a group of perverted robots would hunt her all over the world, and that they might even hunt her parents because they could give birth to offspring carrying the X gene. That kind of thing must not be allowed to happen. Although he cannot be killed, his parents are just ordinary people. My parents in this life love me so much, and I already owe them so much, so how can I let them be put in danger because of me? If we talk about mutants living environment before, Lu Yu just watched and hesitated with pity. So now Lu Yu has completely made up his mind to do his best to change the future. He will never allow the lives of his relatives to be threatened. If Lu Yu hadn't forgotten which company researched Sentinel, Lu Yu would have had the urge to target that company and eliminate all researchers and research data. He knew that at this time, Sentinel's research had already made breakthroughs due to the acquisition of Mystique's genes, and that the kind of abnormal robot that would make all mutants despair in the future had begun to take shape. But so what? Although he currently has no way to stop the development and research of Sentinel, Lu Yu is not worried that this kind of Sentinel can restrain him. Mutant ability is not his strongest method. Lu Yu believes that as long as he gives himself some time to grow, even if Sentinel will be born according to historical development, he is also confident that he will use thunderous means to destroy Sentinel as soon as they emerge, and let those careerists in the United States never dare to create it again. The sight of Sentinel raging around the world will never happen. There is a black aura invisible to ordinary people surging and rolling around Lu Yu, as if he can't wait to sweep the world with overwhelming force after Lu Yu gives the order. Are you new here? I don't think I've seen you before. Perhaps because of the past experience of being looked down upon. The voice of the black child lacks confidence and is full of unconfidence. Yes, I just arrived yesterday morning. Brother, there is no need for you to be so timid. We are all the same, right? Lu Yu now had a clear idea. He patted the black child on the shoulder and said nonchalantly, as a mutant, you should be confident. One thing, we will definitely win this war in the end. The black child, who was left confused and didn't know what Lu Yu meant, stood there blankly. Lu Yu walked up the stairs not far away with a smile. He saw the sign indicating that the upstairs was the canteen. Lu Yu, who had not eaten all day, felt that he should go eat something, although he was not hungry. The food in the cafeteria of Xavier's school is very good. Because mutants' body consumes more energy than ordinary people, The dishes here are richer than the private elementary school Lu Yu once attended. Prince? Great. I didn't expect to meet you here. Lu Yu, who was sitting on a dining chair in the cafeteria and eating a large piece of steak, heard a young female voice calling him in surprise. Wendy Angel, your college life looks pretty good. Lu Yu raised his head and smiled at the person who called him. Apart from the teachers, there were only people in Xavier's school who could recognize Lu Yu. There will be no one else for Wendy. Seeing Wendy and two children of the same age standing together holding dinner plates, Lu Yu felt sincerely gratified and happy that Wendy could make friends. He had been worried that Wendy would become autistic and introverted because of her claustrophobic life in the past few years and was unwilling to accept others. Now it seemed that his worries were completely unnecessary. After seeing Lu Yu, Wendy ignored her new friends. She put the plate on the table and sat next to Lu Yu. She held Lu Yu's hand and said in a wrong tone, "Yesterday I thought I went to look for you, but the professor said you needed to rest and wouldn't allow me to go. I searched for your room for a long time but couldn't find it. I haven't had much rest these days, so I slept a little long." Lu Yu patted Wendy's head lovingly. "I'm sorry for making you worry. Are you the newcomer who has been sleeping all day?" A boy with blonde hair suddenly challenged Lu Yu with a mocking look on his face. "You are also a mutant. What is your ability? Can you sleep all the time?" "John, please pay attention to the tone of your words. He is Wendy's friend and will be our classmate in the future." Another cute girl frowned and scolded the boy. "Katie, I just want to teach this newcomer the rules of our academy. I'm helping him." Wendy wanted to speak with an angry look, but was stopped by Lu Yu. He already knew who the boy who had provoked him was, John the pyromaniac from Xavier's school, who had later defected to Magneto. The person who speaks for him is Shadowcat Katie, who helps Wolverine travel through time and space in the future. The rules of the academy? I'm curious. Lu Yu stood up and slowly wiped his mouth with a tissue. Xavier's school is a place where you learn how to master mutant ability. Are there any other rules that I don't know? Here the weak must obey the strong unconditionally. John looked very excited. He took out a lighter from his trouser pocket and said eagerly, "Do you want to try a fight?" The excitement of adolescence. Lu Yu scratched his head, feeling a little helpless. "No matter how I look at it, I feel that you are in the late stage of the second-grade disease and cannot be saved. You will regret what you said soon." John lit up the lighter and said fiercely to Lu Yu. Although he didn't understand what the late stage of Chuyunivio meant, he also knew that it would definitely not be a good word. He wanted to teach this boy a lesson for daring to speak rudely to him. Neither he nor Shadowcat noticed that after Lu Yu stood up, the sand in every corner of the cafeteria began to slowly gather on the ground behind Lu Yu, and it had gathered into a sand ball as big as a fist. In Wendy's field of vision, the black aura around Lu Yu has been spinning and flowing rapidly. She has never seen the black aura as unusually active as it is today. Wendy had a feeling that these black auras seemed to be ready to drag John into the kingdom of death at any moment. Chapter 18. Shadowcat looked at Lu Yu worriedly. In her opinion, it was a very unwise behavior for the handsome boy in front of her to conflict with John, and he might get hurt as a result. John's ability is to control flames, which is a very powerful ability among all mutants in the entire academy. She does not think Lu Yu can beat John. She knew that many students had conflicts with John before, and in the end they were all beaten up by John and would go around when they saw John. Shadowcat glanced at Wendy to persuade her to persuade Lu Yu, but Wendy seemed not to notice. This made her a little anxious, wondering if she should report the situation here to the teacher. Wendy really didn't see the look Shadowcat gave her. Her attention was now completely attracted by the black aura around Lu Yu's body. For the first time, she heard the black aura whispering softly. Wendy remembered that Lu Yu had told her to learn to communicate with black aura, so she was now trying her best to hear clearly what black aura was saying, but unfortunately she had little success. She was not worried about whether Lu Yu would be defeated by John. In her mind, Lu Yu was invincible. How could she lose to that annoying John? After John provoked Lu Yu, Wendy classified John, a classmate she met yesterday, into the people she hated. The weak must obey the strong unconditionally. Lu Yu gently repeated the words of Burning Man John. "That's right. Now I just want to teach you this truth. Even if you beg for mercy, it's useless." John thought that Lu Yu was afraid of him, so he laughed a little arrogantly. who knew you had already provoked Mr. Burning Man. Facing the arrogant John, Lu Yu was not angry, but looked at John as if he were a pitiful person. John felt uncomfortable being looked at by Lu Yu. He said with a sarcastic look, "Didn't anyone tell you? Your eyes are really disgusting." After saying that, the flame in the lighter in his hand suddenly jumped up and turned into a slender line of fire that rushed towards Lu Yu. Lu Yu didn't panic. He protected Wendy behind him with one hand, and pulled the ground with the other hand. A curtain of sand stood up from the ground, blocking Lu Yu's face. The line of fire hit the sand curtain and instantly broke into sparks and disappeared into the air. After all, it's just an ordinary flame generated by a lighter, and it can't burn through a wall made of sand. After blocking John's flames, the sand curtain turned back into fine sand and floated over Lu Yu's open hands to form a ball-shaped ball of sand. Don't talk so much nonsense when you fight in the future. It will give your enemy enough time to prepare how to deal with you. Lu Yu looked very disappointed and shook his head. Didn't you pay attention to our steps just now? Besides, your flames don't seem to work as well as you think. John did not expect that Lu Yu could control the sand to resist his fire. He looked at the ball of sand floating in Lu Yu's hand and said with some irritation, "You forced me to do this." After saying that, he was about to light the lighter, but at this moment, a stream of yellow sand suddenly surged under his feet, and he took the lighter away with a roll in his hand. "I warned you to watch your steps, why didn't you listen?" Lu Yu smiled and took the yellow sand and put it in his hand for the lighter, playing with the zero in his hand. "Give me my lighter." John swallowed his saliva and looked at the yellow sand floating in front of Lu Yu with fear, not daring to act rashly. "It's mine now." Lu Yu put John's lighter into his pocket. Someone gave him a limited edition Zippo lighter and he had no reason not to accept it, even though Lu Yu did not smoke. "I agree with you. The weak must obey the strong unconditionally. So as far as you are concerned, whatever I say must be what it is." Lu Yu spread his hands and said helplessly, "There is no way. I have to abide by the college rules you mentioned, right? I am a very gregarious person." "You." Burning Man John stood there not knowing what to say. There was a trace of resentment in his eyes, which was keenly caught by Lu Yu. Lu Yu knew that John had a not-so-good childhood, which left a deep shadow in his heart and had a perverse personality. But he didn't expect that John's views would be so narrow since he was a child, and he would resent him because of the smallest things. Glancing at Wendy, who also had the same unfortunate experience next to her, I saw that this little girl was completely different from John. She had always maintained a pure and kind heart. In fact, many people with unfortunate pasts in Xavier's school in the future were eventually led on the right path by Charles, but John, the pyroman, has always been obsessed with power. This made Lu Yu couldn't help but sigh in her heart. John really lived up to his title of rebel. "Without a lighter, you are nothing." Lu Yu's tone became colder and he said with disdain, "You dare to call yourself a pyroman? You are really not afraid of others laughing at you." This sentence simply hit John's weakness. He was so angered by Lu Yu that he lost his mind. He no longer cared about the sand controlled by Lu Yu, and rushed forward to hit Lu Yu with his fists. Lu Yu's body has reached the quality of an adult. How can John, who is in his teens, be able to compare? Before John's fist could land, Lu Yu kicked him to the ground. "Suddenly I feel a little disgusted with you, so I don't want to hold back." Lu Yu stepped on John's body and said condescendingly. John struggled to get up, but the pressure exerted on Lu Yu's feet was not something he could struggle away from. "I apologize to you on behalf of John. He is miserable enough like this. Can you take your feet off him?" Shadowcat said to Lu Yu unbearably. "Definitely." Lu Yu knew that Shadowcat persuaded him because he was soft-hearted, so he raised his eyebrows and said to Shadowcat in a pleasant manner. However, although Lu Yu agreed to Shadowcat's request, he still stepped on John and had no intention of moving away. "Just wait for about 2 more hours." Lu Yu increased the strength on his feet, making John scream in pain. Shadowcat had nothing to do to Lu Yu and could only cover his eyes. "Prince." A gentle word suddenly came to his mind, causing Lu Yu to stop. "We should not use our power against our own people. He has learned enough lessons." "Professor, I have never acknowledged him as one of my own." Although Lu Yu said so, he still took his feet off John. John crawled forward a few steps and stood up awkwardly, his feet trembling non-stop. "You should thank the professor for interceding for you." I have prepared many projects for you later. Lu Yu's words frightened John and took a few steps back, looking at him with horror. Chapter 19. Sitting on the sofa in the office, Lu Yu looked at the professor opposite him and felt a little guilty. He remembered that he used to be called a parent when he had fights in school. He wondered if Charles might be as pedantic as those teachers. He made the first move, and I just had no choice but to defend myself. Lu Yu felt that for some reason, he said this sentence very smoothly, and he also seemed very confident. You seem to dislike John very much. Charles's voice was very calm, making it difficult to hear his inner thoughts. It's not that I don't like it. Lu Yu shook his head and replied, it's that I hate it very much. This can't be confused. John's tragic experience in his childhood resulted in his current extreme and fiery personality. You should know that few people are as lucky as you. Lu Yu stared straight at Charles. Wendy also has a similar past to him, but I can only see innocence in Wendy, while there are too many bad things in John. Because of this, we should guide him back to the right path, right? John likes to bully, so I asked him to try what it feels like to be bullied. I believe that after he experiences that feeling, he will never bully others again. I am telling him the right thing, and this is my way. Lu Yu answered Charles without showing any signs of weakness. Tolerance, child. Tolerance is a very powerful force. Violence will only make people surrender, not change. John is just a child as old as you. He is not as mature as you, so we need to tolerate him with our heart. I believe he can be changed in the future. Charles persuaded Lu Yu earnestly. Professor, human nature has been determined since birth. This is not something we can change the day after tomorrow. Lu Yu did not agree with what Charles said. He shook his head and said meaningfully, if a person is born with a bad guy, even if he grows up among a group of good people, when he meets another bad guy, that's when he unleashes his bad nature. Lu Yu knew very well that John would not change much in the future and would betray Xavier's school, but he couldn't tell Charles directly that the pyro baby you thought you could teach well would abandon you in the future and be content with your good friend. Let the world show off, right? So Lu Yu used a very subtle way to express to Charles that John was a typical rebellious guy and an ignorant white-eyed wolf. This is indeed the case. In the future, everyone at Xavier's school will treat John as a family member, but when he turned his back on Xavier's school, he resolutely did so without any nostalgia, just because Magneto could bring him power and rights. Originally, Lu Yu also felt that if he could change John from a young age, he might see a different Huo Ren. But after seeing the resentment in John's eyes, Lu Yu gave up the idea. No matter how small a white-eyed wolf is, it is still a white-eyed wolf. It cannot turn into a husky. As Lu Yu said, nature determines a person's path. Charles didn't answer after listening to Lu Yu's words. After being quiet for a while, he suddenly frowned and said to Lu Yu in confusion, Child, I feel that your heart is very confused and very irritable. I think you need my help. Have you read my mind? Lu Yu's pupils narrowed sharply and asked in a panic. He was really afraid that Charles checked his memory out of curiosity when he was reading his mind. I will not enter the memory of any of my students without invitation. Charles put his hands on the armrests of the wheelchair and looked sincerely into Lu Yu's eyes. Especially for you, Prince, I will respect your privacy to the greatest extent. Thank you, Professor. Lu Yu turned her head and looked out the window with a bit of confusion in her eyes. Just for the people I love and the people who love me, I have to do something against my will. This is a very difficult proposition. Charles stared at Lu Yu deeply. On one side are the people you care about, and on the other side are the things you don't want to do. My child, I know very well that if you are determined to do something in the future, no one in this world can stop you. I just hope that you will not lose yourself under any circumstances. Use your humanity to harness the power God has given you, and do not become a slave to power. I promise not to be controlled by power, Professor. Lu Yu nodded cautiously. No one knew better than him what the consequences would be if his power was out of control. Charles smiled and said to Lu Yu, I think what you have to do won't happen tomorrow or next month. Right. Yes, it's still early. Lu Yu also laughed, and he suddenly realized that he had indeed pushed himself too hard. There are still decades before Sentinel appears, and he obviously still has enough time to adapt to his current role. Lu Yu is different from Charles. He is not as holy as Charles. He knew that many people would definitely die in the future plan to clean up Sentinel, but those were the people who deserved to be killed, but Lu Yu would never be the least bit soft-hearted. It was just that there was a moral hurdle in his heart that he would not be able to overcome for a while. Charles nodded happily. I'm glad you can get out of the constraints of your own thinking. Lu Yu stood up and said to Charles, well, if the professor has nothing to do, I want to leave first. I promised Wendy that I would go find her soon. I hope you have a good time at the academy. Charles did not mention John again, but smiled and waved to Lu Yu. I think it will be very pleasant. Lu Yu walked to the door, opened it, and suddenly asked Charles, Professor, did Teacher Chin tell you the results of our inspection today? Didn't you change the time to tomorrow? Lu Yu pouted. Okay, I remembered it wrong. Chapter 20. Lu Yu stretched out, glanced at the Doraemon alarm clock that was running around on the floor and kept ringing. He helplessly controlled the sand and sent the alarm clock to his hand, and pressed Doraemon's neck hard. The bell on the bed stopped the alarm clock. Ever since Wendy made this alarm clock for him last year, Lu Yu has never had a good night's sleep since then. Lu Yu now regrets very much why she encouraged Wendy to learn to build airplanes from Hank, that lion beast. Lu Yu has always coveted the supersonic fighter plane from Xavier's school. After Lu Yu tried to fly the supersonic fighter plane into the sky without success, the teacher at Xavier's school never allowed him to get close to the plane again. Lu Yu was very dissatisfied with the teacher's decision. She had already obtained her car license the year before last. Did they think I couldn't fly a plane? Feeling dissatisfied, and discovering that Wendy was also interested in technology, Lu Yu began to encourage Wendy to pick up a turkey and a cup of coffee to find Hank's apprenticeship. Hank is an expert in building airplanes. The first airplane in Xavier's school was built by Hank. In addition, Hank is also an authoritative expert in many aspects. Although his title is Beast, he is one of the smartest people on Earth. Lu Yu believes that if Wendy can learn from Hank, then they can build the most luxurious supersonic fighter by themselves, and he will no longer have to worry about the broken copper parked at Xavier's school base. Iron. As for building a luxury aircraft, it will cost a lot of money. Over the years, relying on his knowledge of the Marvel world, Lu Yu has accumulated terrifying wealth by buying stocks of familiar companies. Let alone one, Lu Yu would not frown even if he made a cross. A few days ago, because Tony Stark announced that he would give up the weapons development department, Lu Yu took advantage of a big loophole, making him the largest shareholder in Stark Industries. Will Iron Man's business not make money? Lu Yu scoffs at venture capital investors who say Stark will go out of business. In addition, Lu Yu also has a lot of shares in the stocks of large groups such as Osborne Industries and AIM Industries. It can be said that Lu Yu has now become one of the richest people on the planet. It's just that having a lot of money has no effect on Lu Yu's dream of flying a plane. Xavier's school is a special place. He can't just buy an airplane with a rear door from the manufacturer and fly it back. He could only hope that after Wendy learned how to build an airplane, he could buy the parts and let Wendy build one for him. It is a pity that God, who loves Lu Yu, has not wanted to satisfy him. Until now, the luxury airplane Lu Yu dreamed of has not been able to be built. After studying for several years, Wendy made a bunch of messy gadgets. Most of these gadgets Wendy gave to Lu Yu, which caused a lot of trouble in Lu Yu's life. Among them, the alarm clock that runs all over the floor when it rings is the one that Lu Yu hates the most. Lu Yu is very helpless about this alarm clock, because the design inspiration for this alarm clock was provided to Wendy by Lu Yu. She just told Wendy the things in the anime in her previous life as anecdotes. But who knew that on Lu Yu's birthday, Wendy actually gave her an alarm clock that was exactly the same as the one in the story Lu Yu told. This was the first time that Lu Yu realized its power. From then on, Lu Yu could no longer sleep directly until she woke up naturally. Shadowcat, how many times do I have to tell you? Please tell me before entering my room, or go to the door and knock. As soon as Lu Yu got dressed, he saw the already charming Shadowcat coming through the wall, so he roared at Shadowcat. Shadowcat rolled his eyes at Lu Yu and said with great disdain, "With your small body, only a silly girl like Wendy would like you. I am not happy to see you. I really don't know what's good about you. You like to act cool, bratty, and put on airs. By the way, you also like to hit people." Shadowcat pointed at Lu Yu's shortcomings one by one with his fingers. Oh my god, how can my Wendy do this? I love bloody and cruel violent people like you. In the end, he covered his face in an exaggerated manner and looked at Lu Yu with a very incredible expression. The door is there, please get out. Lu Yu issued an eviction order to Shadowcat unceremoniously. His face turned a little dark. He didn't know why Shadowcat always liked to use the incident of lighting up the fireman in the cafeteria to blame herself. Didn't she hate John now? You know I will never open that wooden board and then close it again. There is no concept of a door in my world. Shadowcat has become accustomed to Lu Yu's attitude every time he breaks into Lu Yu's room. The next note passed through the wall and disappeared from Lu Yu's sight. Lu Yu picked up the note dropped by Shadowcat. He knew that this was a letter written by Wendy to him. Although everyone now has a mobile phone, Wendy still likes to use this method as a child. Shadowcat is the messenger. As a reward, Lu Yu has to buy several genuine songs of Meteor Singer for Shadowcat every year. I bought a new dress. Come over and see if it looks good. Wendy's words did not give Lu Yu the right to choose at all. She calculated the time set by the alarm clock accurately before calling Shadowcat to call her. It was not a message, but a small note. Wendy really liked the feeling that only the two of them could know the content. Lu Yu reluctantly put the note in a box on the desk, then picked up his mobile phone, put on his coat and left the room. Hi, Prince. Did you sleep in again until now? The person who greeted Lu Yu was named Bobby. He was the famous Iceman, one of the only Omega-level mutants on the planet. His potential can even achieve freeze time. In the Academy, if we want to count the people who have the best relationship with Lu Yu, Bobby can be ranked in the top 3 besides Wendy. I want to correct your stupid and wrong concept. This time is still very early, Lu Yu said to Bobby, very dissatisfied. He is a person with morning anger, and his anger cannot be unleashed on Wendy, and Shadowcat runs too fast, so he can use Bobby to relieve his anger. But now the second period has ended. Bobby looked at his watch and said with an envious expression, "It would be great if I could be like you and don't have to go to class. You can do it too." Lu Yu patted Bobby on the shoulder and said with a promising expression, "If you can resist beatings like me and still refuse to repent after being beaten dozens of times by Aurora, teacher, they won't care about you anymore." Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe.